we are back. I have renamed my server. I have created a personal user account for myself. And actually, let me show you that. Do the PowerShell right quick. The fun thing about PowerShell is that you can run standard cmd.exe commands inside of it. User, yeah. So I am an admin and I am a user. I'm going to do the same thing with the administrator. Because I've also, and the account is not active. I've disabled it. I actually had to fire up the MMC, the blank MMC, add in the local users and groups snap-in just to do this. I could also have done it at the command line. So I'll close that. What I'm going to do now is manage, add roles and features. This is where we're going with this. What we're going to do is install the Hyper-V role. Next, it's a role-based feature. You can also, you can install into a running computer, a virtual machine, or even an offline virtual hard disk. So there's some pretty tight integration with server. I mean, starting really with Server 2016, going forward into 2019. There's some pretty tight integration with virtualization, which should tell you something about how important that is. And I'm going to select my own server. Of course, once I get these two things, my two servers in a sandbox together, I could just as easily manage that from this or this from that, or maybe even install the server manager on my Win 10 box and let it be the command center for both of them. And I'm going to click Next. What I'm going to choose is Hyper-V. Notice that it is not going to require, and it may require other things. So I've got my Hyper-V management tools, my RSAT tools, my role administration tools, add features. It may install some other things, and I'll let it. Notice we are not doing ADDS right now. We're not doing host guardian services. We're not doing remote access or remote desktop services. If we wanted to do VDI, we would have to turn on remote desktop, which I think would also involve Active Directory. This is, as I said, this is a member server right now. Later, when I'm good and ready to set up VMM and System Center, then and only then will I add it will I add it to the Active Directory. I mean, right now, it's completely standalone. It'll do what it wants in a work group. Later, I'll add it to the Active Directory, possibly upgrade it, promote it to a domain controller. I'll click Next. Let's see. So, allows you to virtualize server workloads. Should identify network connections you want to use for virtual switches. I really only have the one. In the real world, you might have one or more multi-port NICs. So you'd have many options. But in this particular case, I've got just the one VNIC. Of course, I can add that if I want to. And then there's a link here. So I'm going to click Next. Back. Okay, so your Hyper-V Manager, you can use the Hyper-V Manager to create and configure virtual machines. And at that point, we can begin to compare and contrast what the Hyper-V Manager looks like in this environment versus Win 10. And of course, I'm going to tie my virtual switches to my only network connection, my Ethernet 0. Okay, if we want remote access, we're going to need another virtual adapter. I might add that later and make it a host-only, part of a host-only network. Okay, you can also set up live migration or Kerberos. If it's going to be part of a cluster, do not enable migration now. Live migrations, that's basically, live migration and storage migration are analogous to Hyper-V, to VMware vMotion and storage vMotion, which we discussed in the data center virtualization chapter last week, or depending on when you're watching this, we will either have already discussed this or We'll discuss it in the future, which I suppose it covers all the possibilities. And it's going to put all the disks here. Now, I'm going to leave it for now like this. I think I can probably change this later. I might add a virtual hard drive to this thing and do some storage configuration on it, so that really, so your OS and your virtual machines are not living in the same partition. Next, restart automatically if required. Yes, I will allow them, and I click install. And now we wait. It is 4:28. Let's see how long this takes. Okay, so that took about 2 minutes. And what we'll do now, so that was activity 5.1. The next thing what we want to do, actually we're going to wait just a minute. Because as you add roles and features to these things, it's still thinking. As you add roles and features to these things, you'll see new options pop up here in the sidebar. I think there may be a technical term for that, but I'm just going to call it the sidebar. So close. Note, of course, that so we've got file and storage services turned on, which kind of makes a lot of sense in context. And the Hyper-V. Note that a lot of these roles are also services. And if you have a problem with a specific role, sometimes all you need to do is restart the service in question. Just as, say, for example, you've done some reconfiguration. Say on a Linux box, you've built DHCP or built out a new DNS zone. You just restart the service rather than having to reboot the machine. So now that I've got Hyper-V installed, I can go ahead and go to my Hyper-V manager. And it looks exactly the same as my Hyper-V manager. Now let me shrink this a bit. As my Hyper-V manager in Windows 10. So I see myself. Now that because you can choose this option to connect to a server, I could now, once I have my Win 10 box and my server, my Hyper-V server, member server, all back in the same sandbox together, putting this thing in the domain, adding it to the LAN segment, I could use Win 10 to manage this thing, and not even worry about the GUI. Save myself a little energy, shall we say, in terms of my performance. So look at what my performance is like right now. Okay. So this is me. I am running at, I've got my 2 disks helping my performance somewhat. I'm at about 19 gigs. I haven't even so much as started a VM. Of course, with this server, 8 gigs, I might, so let's do that. The next thing we want to do is create a new machine. So file, action. Okay, so you have to choose your server. Now, new virtual machine. Boom. Now, one of the first things you're going to do is specify its generation. Okay. Default values. We're gonna specify its location, its generation, give it some memory, configure its networking, connect to a hard disk, etc., etc. So I've got about 50 gigs on this drive. I probably still will want to create another VHD at some point. So next, let's call this Win 2016. And I'm not going to store it in a different location. I could if I wanted to. Say, for example, if I had built that VHD. And I'm going to make this, once you make this choice, Gen 1 versus Gen 2, I am going to go with, let's see. Let me look at the instructions. I'm going to choose Gen 2 for better options, better performance. Click Next. I'm going to give it, okay, I'm going to leave it with 1 gig of memory. That's kind of nuts for this system, but I can do it. I'm not going to, okay. And I'm going to use dynamic memory. This will allow it to not take up more memory than it needs, just as, use dynamic memory will actually allow it to grow beyond that limit. So next. Notice that we're creating the VM, installing the guest OS is a whole other subject. I'm going to put it on that one, connected to that one. Yeah. Actually, no, strike that. Your instructions say not connected. This is just a practice. I'm creating the hard disk. I do not want to do that. I only have 50 gigs, and I'm not going to spend more than I have. You could literally make this a 24 terabyte drive, a 64 terabyte drive, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give it 15. My numlock key was off. So I'm not going to use an existing disk or attach to a VHD later. Next. And I'm going to install later. Then click Next. And so there we are, our summary, finish. And it's going to think, it's creating the VHD. And now that we've got something to work with, here in the center column, you've got your library over here, your actions pane here, your control pane in the middle. Once we have a VHD, once we've got something spun up, we can actually watch sort of what the screen looks like, what the console would look like in thumbnail right here. So there's that. I've got Hyper-V up and going on my server. It's really kind of the same process as on Windows 10 at the desktop. So thank you for watching, and we'll keep going.